The birth of Ashin. Finn Mac Cumhaill had two favourite hunting dogs, called Bran and Skillon. He trusted them as if they were family, and in a way they were. You see, the dog's mother had once been human. Fionn's aunt, in fact. While pregnant, she had been turned into a dog by a witch, and later gave birth to her twins in the shape of dogs, and Fionn named them Bran and Skillon, and their strange heritage made them much more than ordinary dogs. One day, Finn Mac Cumhaill was out hunting with the Fianna and his two dogs. They roamed the plains of Kildare all day and had no luck catching anything, and were heading back to Fionn's fort on the hill of Almu. And they were almost there when a dappled deer sprung out of the ferns right in front of their path. The hind's dark eyes looked out at Fionn from under long lashes, and then skipped away again, and it was almost like it was asking to be chased. And there was no better dogs to do it than Bran and Skillon. They took off after the deer, bounding over rotting logs and crashing through the undergrowth, and Fionn followed, sounding his hunting horn so that the rest of the Fianna and dogs could follow. His horse struggled to keep up with Bran and Skillon, who were heading straight towards the hill of Almu, and Fionn thought that this was strange. Wild animals usually kept a wide berth from human dwellings, and he'd expected the deer to head deeper into the forest. But the deer, the dogs, and Fionn were moving so fast through the forest that they soon left the rest of the Fianna far behind. And bursting through the alder trees at the edge of the forest, Fionn and his horse emerged onto an open grassland surrounding the hill of Almu. Fionn was flabbergasted at what he saw. The hind lay on the grass, panting with exertion from the sprint, and on either side lay Bran and Skillon, licking its face and trembling limbs, as if the deer was a brother or sister. Then Fionn got off his horse and saw an extraordinary scene. Knowing that there must be something special about this deer that his hounds would not attack it, but actually treat it with kindness. When the rest of the Fianna and the dogs arrived at the scene, Bran and Skillon stood protectively in front of the deer, their teeth bared and snarling. Fionn wheeled around on his horse and ordered the men to call off their dogs. "It was as if the deer was trying to find refuge," explained Fionn, nodding towards his white walled fortress on the hill. "And no guest of mine, even a deer, will come of harm on my property." And with that, the day's hunting was called off, and Fionn led the party up the hill for some much needed rest, and the deer followed, with Bran and Skillon never leaving her side. She lay with the dogs at Fionn's feet as he ate supper. Fionn woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of an opening door. Light flooded with the torches, and standing in the centre of the room was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She had pale skin and hair so blonde it was almost white. Her eyes were unusually dark with long lashes. When he saw her ears, they were slightly pointed, and Fionn knew that she was not human. She was of the side, the fairy kind, the Tuha de Down. "I must be dreaming," he said, rubbing his eyes. "This is no dream, Finn Mac Cumhaill," said the woman. "My name is Sadb, and I am the deer that you chased in the forest yesterday." Speechless, Fionn sat up in his bed. "The dark druid of my own tribe wanted to marry me," continued Sadb, "and I refused, and he put an enchantment on me, turning me into a deer. One of the druid's servants took pity on me and told me that the spell could be broken if I slept in the fort of Finn Mac Cumhaill." "Bran and Skillon must have known this," said Fionn. "They sensed it, because they too are creatures of enchantment." "My home is your home," said Fionn. "For as long as you decide to stay, you have my protection." Sadb did stay, and made herself useful, helping out in whatever way she could, As the days went by, Fionn fell more and more in love with her. Though well aware of the dangers of getting involved with the Sadb, Fionn proposed to her, and they were married, and Fionn was so much more in love, but he neglected his duties as captain of the Fianna, and even stopped hunting, and his men were worried he was getting soft. One day, however, a call came to his door that could not be ignored. "Warships are approaching from northern seas," said the king's messenger. "Please don't go," begged Sadb. And she said to her husband, "I must," said Fionn. "I am the captain of the Fianna, and our duty is to protect Ireland's shores. I will leave my men to guard you, my love. I will be safe as long as you stay within these walls." With that, Fionn rounded up the Fianna from the 5 provinces of Ireland and rode out with freshly sharpened weapons to Dublin Bay. There they fought the invaders for 7 days and 7 nights, finally driving them back to the sea. Those that didn't escape had their ships burned as a warning to their fleeing comrades not to return. Battle-weary, Fionn rode back to the hill of Almu, expecting to see his beautiful wife looking for him, but there was no sign of her. There was an uneasiness that coiled in his stomach, and when he saw the downcast faces of his guards, he knew something had happened. One of them explained. "3 days after you left, we saw a figure that looked exactly like you, returning up the hill with Bran and Scalon. The Lady Sadb was so excited to tell you some sort of news that she pushed open the gates and rushed out to meet you, but the person we thought was you threw off his disguise to reveal the robes of a druid. With a hazel wand, the druid turned your wife back into a deer and led her into the enchanted forest. We grabbed our weapons and we rushed after them, but there was no trace of the deer, the dogs, or the druid." By now the colour had drained from Fionn's face. He didn't speak, but shut himself away in his room, refusing company, food, or drink. On the 3rd day he emerged to take up his duties as captain of the Fianna, but in every spare moment he searched for Sadb. For 7 years he scoured the 4 corners of Ireland with Bran and Scalon, but to no avail, and he'd all but given up in finding his wife again, when one day he was hunting with the Fianna, and he heard dogs making a terrible racket ahead. He parted the foliage to find surrounding a naked boy, who looked around 7 years old. Bran and Scalon stood protectively before the boy, snarling at all the other dogs. Fionn had witnessed this scene before, so he called off the dogs and knelt by the boy. "What is your name, boy?" Fionn asked the child. The boy, whose hair was so fair to Fionn that it almost looked white. Big, dark eyes, didn't seem to understand the question, or the others that followed, and when he tried to speak, he only made grunting noises, like the sound of a deer, and Fionn held out his hand, and eventually the boy took it, and together they returned to Almu. It wasn't easy for the boy to adapt to the new way of life, but Fionn gave him a bed, but the boy preferred the floor. When Fionn gave him clothes, the boy ripped them up. When a meal came, he took it under the table and ate with the dogs. Bit by bit, however, the boy began to adapt to human life. He listened to Fionn's conversations with the Fianna, picking up new words every day, trying them out with his mouth, as if tasting exotic fruit. After a year, he was almost like any other boy in Alma, except his eyes were dark with sadness. That Fionn never asked about. He waited for the boy to offer it up willingly, and one day he did. Sitting beside Bran and Scalon in front of a roaring fire, the boy told Fionn his story. His earliest memories were of being cared for by a deer. She gave him milk when he was thirsty and kept him warm on wintry nights. They lived on fruit and berries, and the boy wasn't aware that a deer was different from him. and one day they visited a man in dark robes carrying a hazel stick. Usually, they steered clear of humans, but the boy's mother seemed to know this man, though she was wary of him because she stood protectively in front of her son, and the man spoke to her in the strange words that the humans used, but the boy's mother shook her head, which sent the man away in anger. Many times this man came, offered something, and then left. One day the man was so angry, he waved his wand at the deer, putting her into a trance, and led her away into the trees. When the boy tried to follow, his mother shook her head, telling him to stay put, and for days he waited for her to return, and when she didn't, she went searching for her. It was as if she disappeared to another world. The boy learned to live alone, hunting by himself, until the day the Fianna found him. Fionn listened to the story with joy and sadness, knowing that the boy's mother was his wife, Sadb. Tears of sadness and joy welled within his eyes, down his cheeks, onto the boy's forehead. Because although Fionn had lost his wife, he had gained a son. He called the boy Ashin, which means little fawn, and he grew up to become the Fianna's greatest champion. Renowned for his poetry, singing, and storytelling, he became the leader of men,